When the first draft of the curriculum that this bill seeks to make a graduation requirement was released, it was universally condemned. The California Legislative Jewish Caucus, to take one example, this is 14 members of this legislature, wrote a letter saying that it echoes the propaganda of the Nazi regime. Echoes the propaganda of the Nazi regime. Now, you would think our response would be to immediately scrap the whole thing and bring accountability to whoever was responsible for this. After all, people have lost their jobs, their careers, for things far less serious than trying to teach Nazi propaganda to high school students. But that's not what happened. Instead, we said, okay, we'll make a few tweaks, we'll make a few edits, we'll tone down the Nazi propaganda, and then we'll impose this on every high school student in California. The inadequacy of this response is reflected in the continuing opposition of Jewish American groups, even on the fourth version of the curriculum. The OMCA initiative, for example, says that at a time when anti-Jewish sentiment, hostility, and violence has reached truly alarming levels, this bill is tantamount to putting an even larger target on the back of every Jewish student. But the anti-Semitism is just one manifestation of what is so fundamentally wrong with this proposed curriculum. And it's not just the exclusion of groups, the denigration of groups, it's that it seeks to impose a particular worldview on students rather than giving the analytical and critical thinking tools to construct their identity for themselves. And I particularly object to the notion that this curriculum is somehow in service of equity. There can be no doubt that equity is an enormous problem in California public education. We have some of the worst achievement gaps in the country, along racial lines, along socioeconomic lines. Before COVID, educational achievement in low-income communities was 49th out of 50, was California's standing compared to the rest of the country. And the situation was so bad that you had a lawsuit brought by students against the state of California for violating their civil rights based upon them not being taught how to read. The state of California settled that lawsuit for $50 million last year. I can speak to this issue firsthand. I taught high school in Los Angeles. I taught 10th graders, and when my 10th graders got to my classroom, the average reading level was 5th grade. When I came to the legislature, my biggest priority was to fight for true educational equity. Yet every attempt I've made to expand educational equity and opportunity has been snuffed out by the most powerful special interest of this capital, whose business model is to keep kids trapped in failing schools. And over the last year, that business model has become keeping kids out of school altogether. The consequences, as far as educational equity, were well understood in advance. Richard Rothstein, author of The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated, said that closing schools would take existing academic achievement differences between middle class and low-income students and explode them. And yet there's a still more fundamental issue here. Because curricula like this are being proposed not just in California, but in other parts of the country as well. And in some cases, they're well-intended, in other cases, they're not. But in all cases, it is exploiting what I believe is a void that has come to exist in public education, not just in this state, but across the country. And that is we've lost touch with what an education is supposed to be about. You know, the unifying thread of education used to be preparing young people to be citizens, to be active and productive members of society. That's what bound an education together. It was the linchpin of self-government. But we don't really think about education that way anymore. And so I think a curriculum like this is coming along and is trying to fill that void. It's like the anti-civics. Rather than having the unifying thread of education be building communities up, it's tearing communities down. So I think that we need to oppose this measure today, and we need to have a renewal in this state of the true civic purpose of education. Thank you.